what will thriving look like for Air New Zealand? Is it thriving, making a new economy out of, making a much larger economy out of the national customers? Will we explore other ports than what we had before? I mean, those are the things we will be looking to explore, if you will. And same thing for learning. I mean, in the survive state, and I think it bears sharing this with everyone, in the survive state, fortunately for us, one of the reasons I was brought to Air New Zealand is to transform learning from a digital perspective, but also process, structure, all those things are important too. And we were ready for that. And so as we were having to move towards executing on the workforce reduction, the demand in our call centers, customer support, and global support went up. And we didn't really have the people for that. So we had to identify what's business critical. Again, everyone, oftentimes everyone says everything's business critical, but really, when you don't have revenue coming in, you really have to get down to brass tacks. And so we were able to cross-skill some people who we would have otherwise exited the company into some of those high demand areas. But it would have been great. So the lesson learned for us and for me is I think those business critical roles or skills need to be determined now, not in the midst of a crisis, because we had to take time to do that. Oh, who out there has this skill? Who can do that? And then if we didn't have it, then we had to take the time to train. Meanwhile, I can say from a personal experience, my sister's mother-in-law, who was from London, her ticket got canceled. She was on Air New Zealand. She was flying round trip from London to Los Angeles. And, I got a phone call because she was on hold for 3.5 hours. And as a family member, that's embarrassing, but I understood what was going on. He didn't know. And so we had to figure out how do we moderate that, because we're known for our customer experience. And quite frankly, during that period of time, we were not living up to, the promise there. And so being able to cross-skill, as a learning function, those people. But again, I repeat, everyone, I really believe as part of a business continuity plan, those business critical skills need to be identified. And back to my point about perpetual learning, people need to already know how to do those things.
One of the things that I've observed through the summer is that experiments that people ran. So you were in there at Air New Zealand transforming the learning department before all this started, right? And what I've learned from a lot of groups that I've spoken to is some of the experiments that they ran before really paid off. So perhaps it wasn't mainstream to do digital learning, or it wasn't mainstream to do virtual hackathons, but one or two people in the organization had experimented with that and tried things out. And boy, those experiments kind of really serve you well. They set you up to be more agile when a big change comes. You also made me think of Rahm Emanuel, who was Obama's chief of staff in Chicago. And he said a famous thing in the 2008 financial crisis. He said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. What I mean by that is that we have the opportunity to reset and fix some fundamental problems that we've had. What do you think should be the focus of people in our profession of L&D as we move forward and we sort of prepare to kind of reassemble work and get back to it? Do you have any sense of where we need to focus? I mean, you mentioned one already.
I think everyone who's in this space understands or should understand this, and that is oftentimes in companies, learning is not viewed as a strategic asset or business critical asset. I think that is the push that I think we need to really apply high intention to going forward, to get everyone to understand the value. And the way you do that is, times like this, when you're able to help the business in a crunch. In the run up to that, to your point, Chris, it's partnering with the business. I think that's a big foot stomp for me, is continuing to partner with the business leaders, because that's how you get transformation done as it relates to learning, to experiment and trial things. And I really do believe going forward, we should be applying more attention to and intention to the tech stack in our companies, the tech debt in our companies, overall, but in particular to learning. Because oftentimes, I know when I was at Dell Technologies, we had 7 learning management systems at one point. And part of my responsibility with my colleagues in my space there was to centralize it to one. So we ended up with one cloud-based LMS. Think about this, guys, from 7 down to 1. And it took us a year to do that because we had over 1 million pieces of content and, like many big companies that have been around a few years. But I think that's what needs to happen. So the 3 things I'm going to say, guys, is focusing on the strategic partnership with the business, evaluating your tech stack and debt, and focusing on the business continuity plan. Not as it is, but as it should be. And that is really identifying those business critical, first what's business critical, and then what are those business critical skills. I
got a couple of questions from the chat window here. So people, thank you so much for giving us questions. We can't see you, but it's good to know you're here. So one person asks a little bit about your cross-skilling, the right people into new roles. So one of your responses was to get people where you needed them. The person says, it's actually Danita, says, did you already have those skills mapped out, or did you have to do that from scratch? Did you have to model the skills you need? Did you have any intelligence on who already have maybe propensity to do that kind of work?
No, Danita. We did know what skills we needed because the business leader knew. So the business leader knows, hey, here's the kind of skills we typically have. Here's what we do. And the other thing that happened during this period, and some of you may have experienced this, for some programs, they're this long in peacetime. In crisis, they become this long. Okay, we can get that done in a day. Really? Yeah, absolutely. We can make it happen. Right. Why? Because we discover what specific skills do you need to do this job? Not all these skills that you may or may not use on the job. Yeah, it's nice to have, but is it necessary? So actually going back to my point about what is business critical, we save the business money, weren't bringing any revenue, but we save them even more money by being able to reduce the training program down, deliver on the specific skill set they needed at the point of need, And no, we had not had those skills met like company-wide. We had to go out and find out. We put out what we call a work interest or skill interest or something like that and see who had the skills. If we didn't get what we needed, which in some cases we didn't, we had to then cross-skill or upskill people into the role.
Another question here. This question is about hybrid work. I mean, I guess to unload or fly an airplane, you've actually got to be physically by that airplane. What kind of opportunities are there for a hybridization of work? I think this is kind of working from home, remote work, in-person work. Is that a trend that you foresee coming in your particular business, and how are you thinking about that?
And when we say hybrid, just so I understand, are we talking about being able to do the job remotely?
Yes, certainly where I am. This time last year, there was 2-hour traffic jams to get into the city to get to your office. Nobody's on the roads now. Everybody's working like me from their home office. Is that a trend that's going to be in your industry, in your company?
Trend. I tell you what will help make it a trend. And some of you will get this. As a result of us losing a large majority of our revenue, identifying what was business critical, we also looked at infrastructure. So opening a lot of buildings, assets, leasing, whatever. Looking at the entire portfolio of property and infrastructure was part of this, what's critical, right, to the business. Identified assets that they weren't business critical. If you just reduced your workforce by nearly half, then you probably don't need all the space you originally had. You realize, I don't know about you guys, but in lockdown, I realized, you know what? I don't really want to go to the grocery store. I really don't need that thing. I've got the basic things I need, and I don't want to go out to the grocery store or wherever. I just don't want to. And then I didn't. And then you realize, you know what? You can do just okay with what is, absolutely necessary. And I think as it relates to hybrid workforce, I think yes, you will see that if companies have already started to not just reevaluate their P&I, but also executed on that. And I know we have. I mean, we've got, again, you've got this much expense in your infrastructure. You have to decide, do you really want to keep writing a check for that when you don't have the revenue coming in to pay for all the expenses that you once had?
I actually think a lot of leaders themselves have also experienced working from home. And I honestly, I've worked with a lot of leaders in a number of different contexts where, we've sort of persuaded them that it's just okay to let people work from home. It gives them some flexibility and you don't really lose productivity and efficiency. And they've signed off on that, but I know in their heart of hearts, they've kind of felt, I'd really rather people were in the office because I can see them and I know what's going on. And I think now a lot of leaders have experienced what it's like to have, some flexibility around that. And I think that might be a driver of change as well.
I worked a heck of a lot more from home. Don't get me wrong. I worked long hours even before COVID. It was just what it was. But it's almost like you can't pull yourself away from that computer just to go use the restroom that's like right there. You're in there, right? That was my experience. It's an hour later. I still have to go to the restroom. Well, it's right there. I'm in my own house.
But remember to mute before you do that. That's my tip. I've got one last question for you because we ask this of everybody who comes on the podcast, and we're doing a season right now on purpose-driven organizations. And you actually led off with, you have a sense of purpose yourself. I ask everybody, was there someone or some experience or something that happened to you that really sent you on this path of doing the work you do and finding your purpose? Or is it something that's just evolved over time?
I think the purpose has evolved over time, but I am going to go back to my roots. Growing up on a idyllic farm, doing the hard chores, yes, but really incubating in a place where I fostered a lot of my curiosity and creativity. I thought a lot about, even as a young person, what am I meant to do in this world? And my grandparents and my parents encouraged that. And I really do believe, a lot of people try to tell you what to do and you should do this and that, but I really do feel like you need to come, discover it for yourself because that makes it real for you.
Yeah. Do you have anything that you can share with the people on the call about how you're thinking about the future of learning and how we can bring more humanity to the work that we do?
I do think that we need to be thinking about learning in the context of more experiential, to your point earlier, Chris, atomizing or democratizing learning, using technology more to enable and cultivate learning, to distribute learning. And I'm going to use purpose again, but purposeful, data-driven, leaner, more agile and strategic learning capability to help move businesses and move companies ahead. And I want to leave you with this quote, and that is, for a moment in time, you are where you used to be and where you will never be again. And so I would say use this time and this moment wisely.
Well, Cindy, it's an exciting time for me. I think it's a liminal time. It's a time of change where we're moving from imposed constraint of lockdown and border closing and all the things that I don't like. And I suspect a lot of people who do the kind of work we do tend to be gregarious people. I don't want to stereotype people, but I think that's true. And I think we have the opportunity to put it all back together in a different way. Right? We don't have to just snap back to how it was before. We can put it back together in a way that makes sense for us. And based on some of the learnings that we've had this year, thank you for sharing what you've learned. We appreciate your questions. We didn't get to them all, but I think we touched on most of them. See if I can find something there. Keeping learners feel present and connected in a time of COVID, especially when everything's remote. Got any tips for people on that?
I think it's doing some fun things. That's one thing we've experienced is, not just jumping into the virtual exercise, if you will. It's actually doing some fun things. I mean, there have been people having dinners together,